Welcome to our webinar series, How to Make Software Migration a Success. I'm your presenter, Brian Kinney, and let's get started by reviewing what will be covered throughout the course of this 5-part series. The goal of this series will be to provide you with some tips on how you can make the most out of software implementation and some benefits provided to your company by exercising those tips. Now before we begin, I do think it's important to recap briefly our first webinar in this series, which was deciding what to adopt. During this part 2, we'll be expanding on some of the themes from that webinar, and if you haven't viewed that, I recommend tuning into that video to learn more about how knowing what to adopt can help empower your implementation. So let's get started on part 2 of our series, which is migrating your data. And in this webinar, we'll learn how to make migrating your data a simple and painless process. Knowing what is relevant to export and what isn't is a big first step when starting the process of migrating your data. This can provide a lot of benefits, including saving time and resources during the exporting process. One good tip to keep in mind as well is to determine who should be responsible for exporting information. Maybe there's someone in your company who is well versed in your system who can help expedite exports. Or maybe you want to give your vendor remote access so they can export your data for you. Determining who is responsible can help clear up confusion, plan next steps, and move the process along. Knowing what needs to be exported will help you recognize what information needs to be exported and what doesn't. This can even pertain to the lists within your old system that you're choosing to migrate. For instance, if you're glancing over your customers lists and you see some columns that you don't want to migrate to the new system, you can choose to leave them out of your export file. If you choose to have your vendor export files for you, either by providing them with a login to your old system, providing a backup file, or allowing them to remote in, ask them to review their export files. This will allow you to control what they format and eventually import, and also clean up any data prior to the importing process for the fresh new system. Determining deadlines is another important step to take into consideration when exporting data. If you and your vendor have agreed that exports will be needed in a week, then recognizing those deadlines will help determine next steps, which could include who should handle the exporting to provide them to your vendor on or prior to the deadline agreed upon. Based on the deadline agreed upon, determining who would be the best to export to achieve the deadline is another important step. If your vendor can export the data for you, then you may consider talking with them about providing them access to your old system in a secure way. Regardless of who exports your data, ensuring that you and your vendor are on the same page is a very important facet of the data migration process. If you decide that your company is going to handle exporting data, then this can promote healthy intercompany collaboration between divisions to export data as requested to meet deadlines. If the system you are migrating to offers sample import files, then you can use those to your advantage when migrating your data. Using sample import files, you can determine what can be imported into the new system and how it should be formatted as well. This will help you export data in a user-friendly way. This is especially helpful if your company is also handling the import process as well as the exporting process. Sample import files will help you gain an understanding of how and where certain information will be stored in the new system, and how you can bring new data into the system en masse. If you recognize what can and cannot be included with imports and see something from your old system that isn't included, ask your vendor clarifying questions. Most of the time there is another way to track information, even if it's not a column header in the new system's sample import file. The solution may be something as simple as a custom field or even a difference in nomenclature. Using the sample import file can help you understand how your data should be organized prior to handing off to your vendor or an internal employee to make importing smoother. A lot of people who choose to migrate themselves don't think of using their new system's sample import files, but this can be a huge time saver when choosing to handle your data migration in-house. Depending on your exported data, transferring information to the import files can be a simple copy and paste to migrate your data into the new system using those sample files and save you a lot of time and resources in doing so. Just to touch on the last slide a little bit more, and this is especially something important to know if your company is handling the importing. If possible, provide exported information to the person performing the import in the new system sample import file. This will help ensure that things are formatted correctly and also bring you one step closer to importing data successfully. Another thing that people don't realize during the data migration process is that your company has a lot of power over your data. The time leading up to the import process is the perfect opportunity to review spreadsheets prior to the data being imported into the new system. This can help you clean up any inactive or messy data and eliminate unwanted information. It's much more beneficial to do this prior to the import than it is after it's imported. Once you're ready to import or share your import file with your vendor, it's important to make sure that the file is in an acceptable file format for the new system. One file type often used when importing is a CSV file type, and this will most likely be accepted by your new system. Though some file types are easy to convert into a CSV file, others may not save so neatly as others, so this is a good thing to clarify with your vendor. So what have we learned with this webinar? Well, we've learned that knowing what is relevant can help save time during the exporting process, and that agreeing on deadlines with your vendor can help determine how exporting is completed. Using sample import files from the new system can help you convert your exported data for importing, and supplying information in an import-friendly manner can help the person importing the data have more success. Thank you once again for tuning in to the second part in our series. Tune in for part 3 of our 5-part series, where we'll learn about tips to train your staff to empower users for a successful migration. We'll talk about tips on involving necessary parties, scheduling sessions with your vendor, and much more to help make users of the new system feel more confident and comfortable for adoption.